This morning's guest is in the United States Air Force Reserve. If he's called up to war, he won't take a gun. He'll take his Bible. Who is he? You'll meet him. Coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're in the reading room of the library at the Grand Strand campus of Horry Georgetown Technical College. We're focused on the chaplain service in the U.S. Air Force. And we're visiting with Father Jamie Danford of the U.S. Air Force Reserves. Good morning, Father Danford. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Is it okay if we call you Father Danford?
It is.
I know, I think you shared before we went on camera there that even though you have rank in the U.S. Air Force, that it's one or the other. It's either your service there as a father or
chaplain.
Or chaplain, excuse me, or chaplain. And with our focus on the chaplain service in the Air Force, maybe we should call you Chaplain Danford.
That would be okay as well.
Listen to that. Do you ever take any other titles? How about in the household?
Well, yeah, I guess the household changes a little bit.
Jamie, yeah, that's right.
Depends if I'm in trouble or not.
Well, it's 7 a.m., so we want to make it easy on viewers, so we'll stick with Chaplain Danford then.
Okay.
That's great. When did you actually get in the Air Force, or the Air Force Reserves?
I joined the Air Force Reserves in August of 2000.
Okay, great. Had you always thought about military service?
I had. My dad was career military, and so I grew up in a military household. I received, at an early age, the call to ministry, and so I pursued the call to ministry, and upon graduating of seminary, there was still a call to the military. And so I pursued the reserve chaplaincy as opposed to the active duty chaplaincy because I still enjoyed the parish ministry, the civilian ministry, and the reserves is a unique branch and has its unique needs as well because we balance not only our civilian jobs but our military job and our family as well. And I saw that need and felt that I could minister in that environment.
Yeah, that is a rare balance. There's quite a bit of balancing going on there. How do you think you'd take all that on? That's a big deal. Are there many, I guess there's still quite a few other folks in the same position, but...
Well, yes, sir. Like, for example, I'm attached to the 315th at Charleston Air Force Base. There's 2,600 reservists there. And we do everything that you would think of an active duty unit. We train for war, and because of the global war on terrorism, many of us are activated and doing a lot in that engagement. But we drill 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks out of the year, and it is a good balance. How do you do it effectively? You do the best you can, but you do try to balance the civilian career, the military career, and the family. We try to put the family first because without the family, the other two, we can't do those to the best of our ability.
That's a great point. Now, would that be the same case, family first within the active service? If you weren't in the reserves, would family still remain first on the totem pole there?
Yes, just the understanding you don't have the needs of a civilian job, and so you can devote, more of a 7 to 5 or whatever your work schedule is, but still the importance of the family, because one day all of us will retire, and the family is still going to be there. And while military service does have a lot of difficulties and a lot of sacrifices, we do try to take care of the families as best we are able to.
You said you grew up in a military household. Was your father in the Air Force as well?
No, sir. My father was in the Army.
Is that right?
Yes,
great.
sir.
Did you all have to travel much growing up?
He did when I got out of high school. He was always a reservist and spent the last few years what's called in the Army an AGR, Active Guard and Reserve. And after Desert Storm, he was moved around and spent some time in Panama, Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, Springfield, Illinois. And so my younger brother got to move around more than I did.
More than you did.
Yes, sir.
That's fascinating. So you are now, and you live where now, Jamie? Or a chaplain?
Either. That's
it's tough. It's 7 a.m. and of course the library is not yet open. They'll be opening here at 7:45 for folks to come in. So it is early.
We understand.
Yeah.
Right now I live in Florence, South Carolina.
Okay.
And I am on what's called an MPA tour. It's a long-term order helping maintain the people that are called and activated for the War on Terror there at the Air Force Reserve Base.
Mm-hmm.
And so I split my time between Charleston and Florence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Share with viewers exactly the role that chaplains would serve, whether in the reserves or in active duty, and even some of the distinctions between both reservist and active duty.
Well, I guess the latter part first. The distinction would be on, one is full-time.
Right, right.
And one is a reserve force that is needed to not only backfill but also to augment what is needed. And the reserves, especially in the Air Force, has moved from a strategic reserve to an operational reserve. But there's still the understanding that that's not our full-time job, even though we do a lot of the same things every day. How the chaplain fits into that, our motto is that we are visible reminders of the holy. Chaplains come from all branches and all faith backgrounds. And we are there to protect the individual's First Amendment right to freedom of religion by either providing the religious needs that they have personally, or if we personally cannot provide them, to seek a way and to find resources that can provide them. All chaplains are endorsed by a denominational agency, an ecclesiastical endorsement, which means their church has interviewed them and understands they're ordained through their church, and their church fully endorses them to serve in the military. Each church also has limitations of what we can and cannot do within the bounds of our faith and within the bounds of our good conscience. And so if we're not able to provide the religious need that is needed, that's when we will go to other resources if we do not have them ourselves.
Very interesting. What are a couple of examples of that? Can you think of any in particular where the church, some of the boundaries that folks would have, whether it's in the Anglican Catholic Church, your church, or if it was in other denominations? What are some of the bounds if you can talk about that?
Yes, sir. A good example of that would be if a Jewish member came to me and asked if I could provide any type of religious service for them. I'm not able to, not only because of my religious convictions, but also for theirs as well. It would be disingenuous for a Christian to perform a service for a Jewish personnel, and so we would try to find a rabbi or a licensed lay reader in their faith tenet to provide that for them. It also works out in the Christian faith as well. When you get to, for example, the views of communion, whether you take a sacramental view of who can receive and who cannot, those are worked out on case-by-case basis, and the chaplain is always free to protect their identity, but also we do everything we can to minister to the needs of our personnel.
Very interesting. Would the rabbi in the U.S. Air Force Reserves or in active duty still hold the title as chaplain? For instance, if you were of the Jewish faith, would you still be a chaplain or rabbi? It would interchange, as you said, not talking about rank ever, but instead
if he came in as a chaplain. There are ministers who also serve, especially in the Air Force Reserve. They're ministers on the outside, but because they're not in the chaplain corps, the military does not view them as ministers, and therefore does not afford them the same right as a chaplain, one of which is to be a non-combatant. And unless, even though they are licensed on the outside, but because they're not endorsed and serving as a chaplain, they could help us out, but it would have to be an agreement, and they would have to come through the chaplain's office in order to provide those rights, but they would not be seen as a chaplain.
So the non-combatant aspect is one of the principal tenets of chaplaincy there.
Yes, sir.
In all the services, and
yes,
they're chaplains in each of the branches?
There are chaplains in each of the branches. There are three main chaplain corps, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. The Navy chaplains provide service for the Marines and also for the Coast Guard.
Okay. They stay busy. Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you all stay busy as well. Even in the reserve instance there, you're, as you said, actively traveling down to Charleston, and I think early this morning or yesterday you were in Charleston, and
yes, sir.
surely making active commitments both to the PD area as well as to the Low Country?
Well, one of the, I would say the majority, because of the Air Force Reserve chaplains, we either have a church or a parish, and a few have chaplain positions in the outside. There are some that are teachers and other things, but the majority of us are parish pastors or parish priests or serve a synagogue. And so we balance the two of those. And one of the interesting where that can hit is, like I said, we serve 1 week in a month. Well, Saturday or Sunday, those tend to be pretty important days.
Right,
so
sure.
We balance between the military, allowing us to pull our UTAs at different times, maybe on a Friday or Saturday, and the church allowing us to be off and viewing that as an extension of the church and allowing us to serve and minister in uniform.
That non-combatant aspect is probably one that a lot of viewers think about or contemplate. Is that entirely denominational? I mean, is it Air Force or military set that the chaplaincy will not be involved in any combat? Or because obviously you've got to deal with soldiers coming back from combat and interfacing almost directly, trying to empathize.
We not only deal with soldiers coming back from combat, chaplains are also embedded with troops. We go wherever they go.
Right.
In the Air Force, it tends to be an air base, especially on the Army and the Marine side, though, forward operating. Our Navy chaplains, our Army chaplains, in the way the war and the world is today, there's really no back line, front line.
Right.
But they would be the ones that would seem to be more out on the front than anyone. A non-combatant means that we do not carry weapons at any instance.
Okay.
All chaplains have an enlisted counterpart that is a chaplain assistant. And I don't want to belittle them to say that they carry the weapon in times of war, but in times of war they do tend to be our force protection. But they're also our eyes and ears. They help us to see what's going on. They help us interact with the troops or the airmen or the Marines. They help us to see where we're needed, because a lot of times the enlisted rank may talk to someone who's enlisted rather than an officer and get nervous when an officer shows up. So they help us set up services. They help us, in the administrative side. And so it's really a team concept. But yes, the non-combatant status it's Title 10 law, and it's also upheld by the Geneva Convention.
Very interesting. Of course, that aspect, as you said, of some type of given the First Amendment right to share with viewers again that aspect, but also making sure there is a separation between church and state, or...
Correct. I mean, as you know, the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law establishing or denying the freedom of religion. And so the chaplaincy is is by nature a religious organization, but it's not necessarily a Christian or a Jewish or a Muslim organization. We're there for all. In one ways, we're there to provide, or, like I said, we're there to provide for, if we cannot provide that service ourselves. But the religious need it's also balanced based on mission requirements, based on the needs at the time. Every time a airman or a soldier or sailor or Marine, every time they have a religious accommodation request, doesn't mean that can be granted. And it's not up to the chaplain to grant that. We all serve at the direction of our commander. In the Air Force, it would be the wing commander. Depending on the mission, we may not be able to do that at the time.
Right.
We may not be able to go to church on Sunday because of what's needed. But each religious accommodation request is looked at, because it's the understanding that it's not whether I deem that religious request to be important, but the service member, whether they deem it to be important. And especially right now, as we talk about freedom and talking about fighting for freedom, one of the core beliefs that we have as a nation is that we're free to worship or not to worship, how we see fit. And so that is what we're there to help. And we're part of that chain. Like I said, it's not the chaplain making decisions, but because we do represent religious ideas, and because we, by our very nature, understand faith backgrounds, we're a big part of that pie. But there are others that would be involved in that process as well.
Mm-hmm. Break down your typical, let's say your typical weekend, for instance, on the weekends of the month you're there, or the 2 weeks, I think you said, or maybe it was less than that, over the course of the year. Just break down what you typically do.
A typical day.
A typical day, absolutely.
Well, as with anything, some of it's meetings, you know, catching up where everybody's been, what everybody's got plans to do, and then we tend to handle a lot of services. For example, retirements. People would like to have invocations for those, promotion ceremonies, induction ceremonies. We provide counseling, spiritual direction. People come and seek us out just like they would a clergy on the outside. All of us have master's level degrees, and like I said, are endorsed by the church.
Right.
And so we do come with those experiences and expertise as well. Visitation, getting out to where the troops are and visiting. And a lot of reserve bases have actual church services on Sunday. We, because we're so tied with the 437th, the active duty wing there at Charleston, the active duty side handles the services, and we tend to do thoughts for the day, meditations, because on the larger scale, you're also at a time crunch. You know, we're trying to do a whole lot in 2 days, 2 8-hour days, and you can only put so much in such little time.
Sure, great point. If a viewer had a potential interest, whether in active duty or in reservists, in getting active, if they've got some religious or have been even active in the ministry, and think that maybe this role in serving the military, whether it's in the Air Force, for instance, could they go online to learn more about chaplaincy, possibly in the Air Force, and find maybe some good phone numbers or other?
They could. The chaplain service website is www.usafhc.af.mil.
Okay.
And right there at the bottom is the link to all there's a background instructions about what chaplains do, what chaplain assistants do.
Great.
And there's also numbers because they would have to get in contact with a chaplain recruiter. And that has a link to all of our chaplain recruiters that they could talk specifically chaplain information.
And give me that URL again real quick, Father Danford.
www.
Right.
.usafhc.
HC.
.af.mil.
.af.mil. So that would surely be for the Air Force there.
Yes.
www.usafhc.af.mil. Okay, very important for viewers who may have an interest there, and to learn, of course, if they wanted to get in the, I'm sure whoever they contact could let them know if they weren't interested in the Air Force, looking in the Army or otherwise.
Well, all the service websites would have a link, so you could probably go to Army or to Navy, and you could see a link to their chaplain corps.
Great.
Get in touch with them as well.
Very important. You know, as viewers think about that, they're trying to think, let's say can you project or give a sense to viewers if you were active and were overseas, let's say, what a typical activity if it wasn't just the 8 hours, and how about that just the 2 days there, if you were in the full-fledged and were away. I think I saw there were some times 180 days there at Charleston Air Force Base, or even your time at Maxwell Air Force Base, where you were very active. And surely, when you think about your days as a chaplain there, where it's, do each of the denominations have to have representation in the chaplaincy, or?
It would be nice, but we do not feel based on what would be called a quota, because however, we do look at the religious breakdown of the services and understand that, you know, it would be nice if we had this many, but we can't draft. We can only recruit and ask.
Right, right.
And so it's really up to the denominations to send us people. For example, there's been a push right now because we're losing a lot of our Roman Catholic priests, and we really need those. And the services have started a push to try to recruit as many Roman Catholic priests as we can, and they're working, and it is working, and we're bringing a lot, because a lot of people just don't, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, and you think that they're always going to be there. And some people may have the inkling of, hey, I would like to serve our men and women in uniform.
Absolutely.
And never follow through, but we do need them. You know, we can always, if anybody is interested, to make the call.
And you're a priest in the Anglican Catholic Church.
Yes, sir.
The reason I ask that aspect, of course, if you think if someone growing up in a Baptist home, and I think you possibly even in that home, and then going to divinity school and in a Methodist divinity school, and obviously now being a priest in the Anglican Catholic Church, you cross denominations with Christ still as a central point, but not necessarily getting Christ-based into your, it's service to God. How does Christ come into the picture there? Can you talk about that? How Christ's role there?
Because, all of us in the chaplaincy that are Christian wear the cross, and so it's the understanding of the reason we do wear the cross. And part of my service has to do with what I feel our Lord commanded us to be disciples and to be witnesses and to go where the people are. I know a lot of people who are prison chaplains, a lot of people who are hospital chaplains, serving outside of what we consider the local parish or the local church. I believe those are the things that God has gifted us with and the different ways that God has, called us into ministry. Mine happens to be the men and women in uniform. So while we are limited on how, I guess, a good way to say it, of how evangelistic we can be in a setting, one-on-one, or when people ask us, we are still free to be ministers. And so if people ask me questions, I'm free to answer those. We just do not stand up, to say the Air Force makes you believe this, because the Air Force doesn't. It's when people come to us on a one-on-one basis.
Excellent. So there is a need to recruit more, whether it's priests, Catholic priests, into the military.
Yes.
It seems like there was a piece in Newsweek magazine not too long ago highlighting, or a national magazine highlighting a true need there, which is part of the reason, the opportunity to get you in, to show that folks can still maintain active lives both in and out of the military, and the reservists. Now, of course, you could be called, or could you be called, to active. How does that work in the reserves? We got about 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, when I was at Maxwell Air Force Base, I was activated when our unit was called up there. And it's the presidential call-up. When the president, and Congress and the way that works realizes that they need more than the active duty can supply to meet a need, they will then start looking at the reserves, and it's either on a volunteer basis or an activation basis. Volunteer basis tends to be for short term, where when we need people for long term, we activate because of employers and the needs of that. And so the call comes down, and you've been activated, and so then you go. At Maxwell, I was activated specifically for home station support, which was to take care of the families and to be there for the troops when they were going, or the airmen when they were going to and from the war zone. And so we saw them off. We gave all the briefings. We told them what we offered, because the reserves also, there is a local community, but there's not. For example, Charleston Air Force Base, we pull in reservists from 5 states. And so when we have families that are there, we're covering that wide range. And so it's more than just dealing with the greater Charleston area. For example, we're talking to people. And there's another aspect of that, our family support office.
Yes.
We worked hand in hand in making sure that not only the person who is deployed is taken care of, but the families that are left back are taken care of as well.
Very important point. Absolutely. It seems like the reservists are almost, that's a real potentially difficult position to be put in if you're called to active duty and have your home church, for instance, for a chaplain there, the chaplaincy aspect there, where you are a priest in the Anglican Catholic Church and the PD. Of course, you could be called to active duty there in Charleston, and it would be very difficult there. And your family even, of course,
yes,
your wife and kids.
The church understands, and the church works with that. And one of the things I would like to mention, we were talking about the religious freedom and talking about what we're free to do when we hold services as well. Because one of the things we do, at a deployed location is we would have Sunday services, Bible studies. In those situations, we are free, as you were talking about, where does Christ fit in, or where does your particular faith background. We're free to be who we are in those settings as well.
Very nice.
It's only when the individuals are forced to be there like at a mandatory meeting, that we cannot be evangelistic.
Right.
But in the other meetings, we are just as you would view a preacher or a rabbi or an imam or a priest.
Great words, Father Danford. Your own children thinking about possibly a military service or even thinking of the chaplaincy?
Well, my two they're 2 and 4.
Oh, yeah,
so
not yet.
Not yet. However, my youngest loves airplanes. So
that's great.
Maybe one day.
That's great. That's a great commitment. Of course, Pete Sealer, who does a column for the Herald, our own air column, said not only is there a need to look at chaplaincy in all the services, but of course, particularly priest, the Catholic faith, there's a real need there, and surely all denominations need a great representation there in the services. We're thankful that Pete opened that door, and thanks for coming up. I know that's a lot of traveling for you to get here. I'm sorry we've run out of time, but we'll surely get you down another time.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Father Jamie Danford, coming up next. I think if we could all get a job description like that, 6 words, a 6-word job description, it's a great highlight. Glorifying God, honoring airmen, serving all. Glorifying God, honoring airmen, serving all, a 6-word job description. If any of us could get an opportunity to have a 6-word job description, but it's that core aspect of servant leadership, glorifying God, honoring airmen, and serving all. Not just a few, but all. And of course, Father Jamie Danford's in that situation as a chaplain, as a father, in his role even as a priest in the Anglican Church. He's serving all and making a difference in so many. You can make a difference. You can make a difference by opening the door for someone else to look at chaplaincy, whether it's in the Air Force, in the Army, in the Navy. The opportunities are out there. Go online, at least in the Air Force side, to www.usafhc.af.mil. Go online. It's a great opportunity. usafhc.af.mil. You can make a difference by getting involved or opening the door for someone else to get involved in the chaplaincy service of the U.S. Air Force. Go online.